Hello everyone, especially all the Charge Blade mains. Today we are going to go over the best builds for the Charge Blade. We are also going to go over if you should even use Latent Power, and I'll be providing 3 different builds depending on how much you want to lean into the Latent Power playstyle. However, it is worth mentioning that most of these builds use some amount of gear from Arc Tempered Raidao, which is currently unavailable. So hopefully you managed to get the gear, or at least some tickets while it was available, or you won't be able to make these builds. But before we get into the builds, first we have to go over Latent Power and if you should even use it. The thing about Latent Power is it's one of the hardest skills to mathematically fit into a build due to the fact that it's just so inconsistent. It's an extremely powerful skill when it's active, but that's the problem. To activate it, you either need to lose about 130 health or be fighting a monster for 2 minutes. Both of those are pretty tall requirements, at least for most hunters whose entire goal is to hunt the monster as efficiently as possible, meaning taking little damage or time to complete the hunt. With that being said, hunts usually involve taking at least a few hits here and there, unless you're playing near perfectly. If that's the case for you, then Latent Power will have some decent value, especially against tougher monsters. But if you never get hit and your hunts end quickly, then Latent Power won't give you much mileage, so you need to just be honest with yourself on whether or not Latent Power is for you. With all of that out of the way, the Charge Blade sets I'm going to be presenting here today are not going to be all Latent Power 5 sets, even though 50% affinity is nice. Instead, I will be providing 3 different builds with varying levels of Latent Power, so you can choose what you think is best for you. Now, as I said previously, most of the builds are going to be utilizing Arc Tempered Raidao gear, and the main reason for that is actually not Latent Power, but instead because of the amazing group skill bonus Allured Soul. Now, the most important thing that you need to know about this skill is that it gives you a 5% raw attack increase, which is just straight up better than the 10 raw attack increase you get from wearing 4 pieces of Gormagala, at least when using endgame weapons. This skill does however have a downside, and that downside is that it will only last until you activate Guts, so you need to avoid doing that in order to maintain maximum damage. Because of this, I recommend using the Moxie Food skill, which will activate before Guts, thus saving your damage. On the bright side, if your Guts does trigger, the other half of Lord Soul will activate, increasing your defense and resistance, which can help turn things around if you're struggling. Moving on to the actual builds themselves, the first build is going to be the general use Latent Power version, and the build I would recommend 90% of the time. To make this build, you will need the Arc Tempered Raidao head, arms, and waist, along with the Gore chest and legs. We will of course also need the Counter Charm 3, but to complete this build you will also need 4 Tenderizer Jewels, 2 Sane Jewels, 1 Chain Jewel, and 1 Physique Jewel. This is going to be your theoretical maximum damage build, but whether it's actually the highest damage build for you is entirely going to depend on your Latent Power uptime. With the 5 base affinity on the Ardian Charge Blade, as well as Weakness Exploit 5, Maximum Might 3, Antivirus 3, and Latent Power 2, you'll be at over 100% affinity with all skills activated, or even higher on wounded parts. But I do have 2 more builds to share with you guys today, and to make this next one you're going to need the Gore head, arms, waist, and legs, along with the Zoshia chest, as well as the Exploiter Charm 2. As for the jewels you're going to need to complete this build, you will need 3 Tenderizer Jewels, 3 Mighty Jewels, 2 Sane Jewels, 1 Chain Jewel, and 1 Physique Jewel. This build is mainly going to be for speedrunners who will kill the monster before Latent Power activates, or really anyone who just doesn't want to use Latent Power for whatever reason. I wouldn't recommend this build to most people unless your hunts are extremely short, but if you don't want to use Latent Power, here is a great option. It's also worth noting that if you can manage very high Agitator uptime, then you can swap the decorations and or the charm around to get Agitator 5 instead of Weakness Exploit 5. Moving on to the last build, we have a Latent Power 5 set, and to make it you're going to need the Arc Tempered Raidao head, chest, arms, and waist, along with the Mizutsune legs. We will also need the Challenger Charm 2. As for the jewels, it's going to be 3 Challenger Jewels, 1 Tenderizer Jewel, and 1 Shockproof Jewel. This build is mainly going to be for those very long hunts like Arc Tempered Raidao, Zoshia, or anything that takes quite a while to hunt. I really wouldn't recommend using this build outside of that though because it's simply not going to be worth it. Now, I haven't mentioned the actual weapon itself up until now, and that's because I assume everyone kinda knows what the best options are by this point, especially considering it's basically the same for every build. But if you don't know or need a reminder, there's really only two good options for your charge blade. The best of which is going to be an Ardian charge blade because the stats are just better than everything else you can craft. For the production bonus, you want to get as much attack as possible. As for the element type, you want to prioritize paralysis because that's going to give you openings to get in more damage, as well as give us impact files that could lead to KOs. As for the reinforcement bonus, you really just want one sharpness increase and ideally 4 attack increases, just to really maximize your raw damage. However, if you don't have that, or just don't want to mess around with the Ardian weapons, then your other option is going to be Zoshia's Charge Blade, which is only a little bit weaker than a perfect Ardian, and has Dragon Element. Which means no paralysis, but despite it being an elemental weapon, it actually still has impact files, so definitely still a great weapon, and you can just craft it so you can't really complain. As for the weapon decos themselves, you definitely want to prioritize getting something in there to help out with your sharpness, whether that be Master's Touch or Razor Sharp. Master's Touch is going to be the most optimal for the builds I showcased here today because the affinity on those sets is just so high, but if you don't have Master's Touch, then you can use Razor Sharp instead. As for the rest of the slots, you just want to be using as much critical boost as your weapon can fit in, but if you're using an Ardian weapon, I'd highly recommend getting Load Shells 2 in there as well. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like and consider checking out this video next.